With the reversible stabilizer function in Warp Stabilizer VFX, you can freeze moving elements in our scene, making them much easier to paint with effects like Paint or Clone Stamp Tool or even Liquify. Then you can unfreeze the scene when it's time to render, and everything you painted will move along with those elements. Let's look at the scene we'll be working with today. Go ahead and grab your current time indicator and scrub through the timeline. So in this shot our camera is moving and our soccer player kicks the ball. We want to add a paint effect over top of this ball, and again with the warp stabilizer we're not going to have to track the scene at all. So select layer 1 and go up under animation. At the bottom of animation go ahead and apply Warp Stabilizer VFX. Immediately it's going to start analyzing your clip in the background. This frees you up to do anything else you'd like to do in your After Effects project because it is taking place in the background. We want to set a really high quality analysis, so go to the Advanced section and make sure to select Detailed Analysis. This will start the analysis over, but this will give us excellent results. Now even though it's analyzing the scene, we can come up and make some changes to our stabilizer. Let's start with the result area, click on the pull down and change it from smooth motion to no motion. We can leave the method set to subspace warp. Under the framing, let's change that to stabilize only. Now the rest will have to wait till the analysis is finished before we can change. Once the analysis is finished, in the advanced section go down to the objective area. Let's change that pull down from stabilize to reversible stabilization. Now it doesn't appear as though much has happened, but if you scrub through the timeline you'll notice the soccer ball hardly moves at all in the scene. This is going to make it extraordinarily easy to paint over top with our paint tool. Now since I want to paint rather than trying to activate the layer panel, I'm going to go up to my workspace in the upper right corner and change it from the standard workspace to the paint workspace. Once we've done that, we have our composition panel on the left and our layer panel on the right. We have to paint in the layer panel. So to load our pre-comp into layer panel, I want you to hold Option on the Mac, Alt on Windows, and then double click on the layer. That will make sure that you've loaded that pre-comp in the layer and our Stabilize VFX function is going to be active. Now we can grab our paint tool. I'm going to go up to the toolbar and grab the brush and have a brush size of about 17. That's soft. You can choose whatever size you like in the brush panel over here and the color. We can set up here with our color chips. So if you click once on the color, you can open up your color picker and choose whatever color you like. I'm going to choose this kind of blue color and click OK. Our opacity we'll leave at 100. Our mode we can leave. Most of this we can change after we paint. So let's get started by painting our first stroke. Now I don't want this to be precise, I want it to kind of wiggle around the scene. So I'm just going to click and drag with my mouse. A couple of squiggly lines, and there we go. Now to see our results of the paint, we need to open up Paint in our timeline. So expand the options for layer 1 and you'll see Effect, and we have our Warp Stabilizer, and then we have our Paint Effect. If you open the Paint Effect, here you can see it was set to actually stay constant throughout the entire scene. Well, we're going to have to paint over the ball as it's moving through the scene, but we'll get there in just a sec. Let's scrub our current time indicator until right before when she kicks the ball, right about at 1 second. This is where we want our current paint stroke to disappear. So I'm going to click on the right side of that paint stroke in the timeline and drag back to the left. Make sure to hold down Shift as you hold drag and it'll snap to your current time indicator. Now if you move one frame down the timeline, our paint stroke has disappeared. Now before we paint a second brush stroke, you want to make sure to deselect this brush stroke so it doesn't get replaced with our new stroke. So I'm just going to click anywhere else in the timeline to deselect. Now I'm going to click in the brushes panel one more time to make sure I have the proper brush select. And then up in the paint options, I'm going to change the duration from constant to single frame. Now we're set to actually paint in the scene. So go ahead and just draw a squiggly over the top of the ball, and then you can move one frame down the timeline. The more varied you can make your stroke, the more interesting the animation is going to be. You can just repeat this process, painting and stroking down the timeline. I think you kind of get the idea that I'm going for here. I may miss a frame or two, but you can see how the paint stroke is now moving along with the ball as I scrub through the scene. Now you can change the blend load for these paint strokes individually just by clicking directly on the brush stroke and clicking on the mode pull down. I'm going to change a different setting. So let's just leave everything set to normal right now. We can collapse our paint options and go back to our standard layout. If you go to open our window and go to workspace and reset to standard. When we render this, we don't necessarily want the scene to look like this. We want the scene to look like it did before we applied the work stabilizer. So we need to apply the warp stabilizer again, but rather than going back under the animation menu, I don't want to trigger warp stabilizer to reprocess again. So I'll click on the warp stabilizer in the effects control panel and just press Command D. That will duplicate the stabilizer, and then we can collapse the second stabilizer and then move it below the paint in the layer hierarchy. This way you can see we have our first stabilizer that's going to freeze the scene, and then we have the paint that we added. And then we're going to use our second warp stabilizer to unfreeze the scene. So let's open up those options, and in the advanced section under the objective, let's change the pull down from reversible stabilization to reversed stabilization. Now if we scroll up through the scene, you can see we have our brush stroke and it's been applied in the scene, and it's tracking along with the ball, and we didn't have to do any tracking. The way that I like to work with this when I'm adding extra elements is not by necessarily using the transfer modes of the brush stroke. What I like to do is literally create a duplicate of the video layer. So I'm going to select layer 1 and just go up under edit and choose duplicate. Now for the second layer, I just want to delete all the effects. So I'm going to click on warp stabilizer in the effects control, hold down shift and click on the second one and press delete. Now in this main composition we can go back under our paint options and see where it says paint on transparent. You can go ahead and enable that feature. If we solo our one layer, all we have is that paint layer. So we can apply any effects we'd like in paint to stylize it however we want. And we can apply any effects to our background video. So now that we've got two separate layers, just to show you one last time, I could change layer 1 to, let's say, a multiply blend mode. Now as I scrub through, you can see it has a different look to the animation. With warp stabilizer, VFX and the reverse function, you can freeze your scene, paint in the scene, and there's no tracking required.